In 2024, I bought a Land Rover Defender in Armenia, drove it to the UK, and then successfully imported it into the UK. I did it in as much of a DIY fashion as I could. I made a few mistakes along the way, and I'm going to be explaining some of that process now and the aim that it might give a bit of assistance to other people who are thinking of doing the same thing. I did a lot of research and I still had to piece things together myself because a lot has changed between 2022 and 2024, and a lot of the information on the internet is out of date now. You find a lot of articles that are guides on how to import a car into the UK, but they're generally written by copywriters and end up kind of in this echo chamber of everyone copies everyone else on Google, and you just end up with rubbish information, unfortunately. So if and when this video becomes out of date, then please leave a comment down below. First off, if you want to import a vehicle into the UK, congratulations, because the UK is probably one of the most accommodating and least restrictive countries for doing so in the entire world. We've got countries like Canada that require it to be 15 years old if you want to import a vehicle, and the US it needs to be 25 years old, and that's for the purposes of protecting domestic production. Lots of countries in Africa and Asia require the car to be 5, 10 or 15 years old. In the case of Armenia, so my Defender will never be registered back there because they just won't let it in, it'll be too old. And that's to stop all the crap hand-me-downs from Western countries polluting their countries. The UK, though, has no real restrictions on age. You can basically bring anything in. The government website does make it seem fairly easy to import a vehicle. It is fairly straightforward, it is doable, but the DVLA are not going to hold your hand through the process, hence me making this video. So just as a quick overview of the basic steps from beginning to end, you'll need to get a customs agent to make an import declaration. That is a technical phrase. You need to then email a copy of the MRN import paperwork to HMRC cars team along with a bill of sale and the foreign registration document, and then wait for Nova confirmation. You then fill out the V55/5 form, send it off to the DVLA with their accompanying documents and a check, and then you wait for a few weeks to get the V5C document back, and then you make the number plates, and hurrah, it's all, there we go, it's all done. There are businesses that you can pay that will do everything end to end. They will pick it up from where you buy it and they'll drop it on your driveway with number plates and completely registered in the UK. I didn't want to do that because I was bringing the vehicle in myself. I wanted to use my own MOT place that I already had a relationship with. So I wanted to do a lot of the bits myself. So in my situation, I basically paid 10% duty and 20% VAT on top. There are mechanisms to avoid paying those taxes, but that really depends on your situation. But I'm going to allude to some of the things you might want to think about. Duty is all based off the commodity code you can see on screen. We've got basically a 2.5 litre diesel engine car. The commodity code dictates that it's about 10% duty, but most vehicles seem to be about 10%, at least at the time of recording. So here are some of the key points from my situation. If your situation is identical to mine, you can follow this like a guide. I did give this information to someone else who also successfully imported a Defender from Botswana in 2024. But if it's not exactly the same, then it gives you a bit of an idea about how your situation may need a bit more research and the kind of things you need to think about. So here goes. I'm going to read off from a list because I can't remember them all. So I'm a private individual doing a personal import. Those are jargon phrases: private individual, personal import. The vehicle was originally built in the UK by a British manufacturer. That means that the records are held by the British Motor Museum, and it's very easy to get manufacturing records to prove the date of build. The vehicle was registered in a country outside of the EU that's also not Japan. The JDM cars have a special arrangement, as do cars in the EU. It's slightly easier. So I actually meant to say cheaper depending on the country it's coming in from. However, one really important point that I've neglected to mention is that since 2022, a change because of Brexit is that any product coming into the UK that was not originally manufactured for the UK market requires duty to be paid, even if it was manufactured in the UK originally. Before 2022, what used to happen is you'd basically, because it was made in the UK and tariffs are designed to make other countries' products more expensive, you would basically pay a 50 quid nominal import duty on the vehicle coming in if it was made in the UK, which this Land Rover was. However, since 2022, that's now different. If it wasn't a product made for the UK market originally, even if it was made in the UK, duty will apply, which is what the case is with my Land Rover, because the heritage certificate says it's an export model. There's not really any way around that. So had I done this a few years earlier, I would have saved myself a big chunk of cash. But as it is right now, it doesn't actually matter where the vehicle was made. It depends if it was made for the UK market. As I showed earlier, using the commodity code, you can go and check up the country that it's being transferred from, and that's what matters in terms of the level of duty you pay. This vehicle was never registered in the UK beforehand, So when the car was exported from the UK, having been originally manufactured here, I wasn't the person that did the exporting. If I had done the exporting and then I brought it back, there's something called return of goods relief, which I may be eligible for, but I wasn't. It's a passenger car with fewer than 8 seats, and it's also over 10 years old, which means that it's exempt from type approval. I don't need an IVA to get it through the process. This Defender I imported, even though it is left-hand drive, it's basically the same as UK Defenders, so it's not really any different than the other ones that are on the road, except for the fact that it's got an engine that was built for the export market, although it did originally run in the UK in the 90s. It has its original engine, which is deemed to be a compression ignition engine for the purposes of the MOT. Now, diesel requirements in the UK are basically you need to pass a smoke opacity test and you need to have not removed any manufacturer-fitted emissions equipment. Petrols have got more stringent requirements, so having brought a vehicle in from overseas, from a foreign country, it may be a bit harder with a petrol car to meet some emissions. The vehicle is under 40 years old, which means it's not exempt from vehicle excise duty, vehicle tax. It's not exempt from an MOT. If it was, then the duty would be a bit lower or even exempt. I imported into Great Britain and not Northern Ireland. That's different because in Northern Ireland you need to have proof of insurance. And I'm a resident of the UK and I'm not transferring my residence back to the UK. If I was, then I could claim transfer of residence relief. So basically, kind of through all that, the cheapest way to import a vehicle would be basically to live overseas, buy a vehicle over there, return to the UK, having been a previous UK resident, or buy a vehicle over 40 years old, ensuring that you can prove the manufacturer date, or buy a vehicle made for the UK market, that's never been registered in the UK before, and then there's buying a vehicle registered overseas that used to be registered in the UK before, which means that VAT was paid originally. Those last two situations are less likely, so unless you're living overseas or the vehicle is over 40 years old, then I would expect to have to budget basically 30% on top, which I assumed I would have to, and I did in the end, but I factored that all into the purchase price. But don't just rely on what I said there, because as part of this process you will be employing experts to help you get the vehicle into the country, and they will be giving you the exact advice you need to know about how to pay and whether you need to pay VAT and duty. For the steps to import a vehicle, you can go to the government website. There's basically 2 pages you need to look at. There's the step-by-step 1, 2, 3, 4 process, which seems fairly straightforward. And then you need to look at type approval. So you go to this other page that's got type approval, exemptions and requirements, and you're trying to figure out which ones apply in your situation. You basically got to combine the information and distill this. But I found the information is not wholly accurate, as I will come on to. I guess one point to tackle is that I drove this vehicle into the UK. I drove in via the Channel Tunnel from the French side to the UK side. There are no customs. There's no red lane or green lane that you need to drive down. So you can just come straight in, and you can do all the import declaration kind of retrospectively online. If you're shipping in a container or ro-ro or comes on a flatbed on a truck, that becomes important because the shipping costs also become part of the duty and VAT that you need to pay as a way of basically making foreign products entering the UK more expensive when competing with domestic products. As a UK citizen, you're technically not allowed to drive a foreign registered vehicle in the UK as a UK resident. If you're a foreign resident, you can drive a foreign car in the UK for up to 6 months. But as a UK resident, you can't. So how you handle that situation or that journey from the port to wherever it is you're going in the UK is completely up to you. HMRC, import duty and the Nova. So this is the bit where I find the information becomes a little bit disingenuous. The government website says, tell HMRC. But what I really think that should say is, HMRC needs to be told. I emailed the HMRC cars team and said, here you go, here's all my information as per the government website for doing the Nova application. And they said, sorry, you can't do it. You need to make a customs declaration, and then from that resulting paperwork, send that to us, and then we can do the Nova application. One of the changes since March 2024 is that you need to make an import declaration using the CDS system, Customs Declaration Service System, and HMRC can't do that. There used to be an old system called Chief Customs Housing Import Export, something like that, that they used to be able to make an entry in, and they said, here's a list of custom agents, or here's a list of companies that will train you to become a customs agent, because you need to use basically the official approved software. I had a quick look at what it would take to become a customs agent. You see this, you see the form, the C384 form, application for release of payment of customs duty from a private vessel. And if you can figure out how to fill out this form in relation to docking a ship, and how you need to fill that out for importing a private vehicle. If you can't work out how to fill in this document, then you need a customs agent. So that's where I think the government website is a bit out of date in that regard. I'll talk about customs agents and doing the import declaration in a minute, but essentially once you've got that paperwork, you need to send to the HMRC's team, which you can find their email address online. And they said I needed to send them, would need to send them 3 things to do the Nova application. I would need the MRN import paperwork from the shipping agent, a bill of sale or purchase invoice if the vehicle was bought within the last 3 months, or a valuation from a club or garage, something like that. And then the certificate of title or registration document or dating letter from vehicle manufacturers to confirm the build date, basically, which is what I used the British Motor Museum Heritage Certificate for. So that's not actually what I did, but I think that's what I would do if I did it again in the future, because knowing the HMRC can do the Nova application, it's just the customs bit that we need to get people for. That was really the mistake I made. So my costly mistake was the fact that you have 14 days once the vehicle enters the UK to make a Nova application, which is basically 10 working days. I was fairly relaxed about it because I believed in the documentation on the website. I thought I was going to email the cars team and it would work. So about 5 days in, because I was doing a lot of other stuff once I brought the vehicle in, about 5 days in I emailed the cars team, and that's when they said, no, this is the actual process. So I had 5 days left. So I was running around a bit trying to find customs agents. I was under a bit of time pressure. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know the process as it was. So I ended up going with what was the company that replied to me the quickest and also happened to have the cheapest quote. And that was a company that offered a Nova service. What I know now is that I've ended up probably paying twice as much in fees as I would have done if I'd gone to just a discrete customs agent. There are loads of customs agents. They just import stuff all day, every day. The Nova bit can actually be done by HMRC. You can do that bit manually. I wouldn't pay for a Nova service per se. I would pay for a customs import service, and there are loads of custom agents available to do that. The reason being, they started off being the cheapest service, but it ended up being, from my perspective, a load of hidden fees. From their perspective, they were just going along a journey, learning more about your situation and saying, oh, well, this applies. Here's another invoice for the fees to go to the next step. It happened about 3 times, so I was very frustrated with the process. But I can see it from their perspective that I was an ill-educated customer. I just find it unfortunate that they were unable to educate me up front in that sense. So what was the cheapest quote originally turned out to be the most expensive. Anyway, it all worked out in the end. I got what I needed from them, albeit I think I paid probably more than I could have done. What I know now about getting customs agents is that I would probably have prepared quotes up front to know what each customs agent would charge. That was before the vehicle arrived in the UK. And then when I arrived in the UK, go with the customs agent, trigger the process, and it should be fairly streamlined from then onwards. And because it's a new industry to me, they've got quite a few different fees, which I'm just going to list off here that you may not have been aware of. So they have a fixed fee, which is a Nova data entry fee, fixed fee for producing the Nova letter, fixed fee for custom system data entry, an admin charge, and then a percentage fee, somewhere between 1% and 5% seems to be the norm, percentage fee of the VAT and duty you actually pay, usually with a minimum charge, so usually about £50 to £75 minimum charge on that, and then above that if the percentage fee is higher. So you're basically shelling out money. The more valuable the item you bring in, the more you're going to pay the customs agent. During the quotation, one of the customs agents did ask me to fill out that C384 form that I showed earlier, and I basically thought, I haven't got a clue how to fill this out. What am I going to be paying you for? No, thank you, I'm not going to use you. Another important point to bear in mind is that when a Nova entry has started, you can't switch to another agent. So that's where I would probably prefer to use HMRC and not use a customs agent to do the Nova side of things. When I was working with the agent, they asked for 3 documents, which is similar to what HMRC request for the Nova, which is a foreign registration document, a bill of sale or invoice, and then any existing customs or import paperwork, because they need to know what's already happened potentially, because that can really kind of mess things up if they don't have a full picture of what's going on. There is a lot of paperwork in this process. There's a lot of bureaucracy. You do kind of get what you pay for. You know, as we've seen with one of the forms, filling this stuff out can be a nightmare if you don't know what you're doing. So they do actually provide a service. But what I found was that shopping around does pay dividends. The fees seem to vary by up to 50% either way, depending on which company you go for, and they've all got kind of different tiers and ways of working out their fees. So it pays to shop around and get quotes. So in future, I would go the pure customs route. The customs people will work out if you need to pay VAT and duty. I've given you some pointers earlier on in this video, but they are the people who actually figure out whether you need to pay the VAT or duty or not, because they need to ultimately be able to justify it to customs service. The whole process took about a week, and I ended up with a Nova certificate which had the VIN printed on it and a confirmation number. That Nova confirmation document is a requirement for the next step for registering the vehicle with the DVLA. Part of registering, I also needed an MOT, and the MOT, because it was not registered in the UK, didn't have a number plate, needed to be done on the VIN number. So I went to the garage before time and explained the process to them that didn't have a number plate, and they said it's fine, they just need a document to be able to basically date the vehicle so they know which rules to be able to apply. So I took along the heritage certificate which had the build date on it, and they were fine with that, and they entered it into the MOT system when it passed. The Defender I imported was known as a rest of the world specification Defender, or row spec. What that basically means was it was built for the export market. It didn't have the emissions controls that modern vehicles had that were made in the same era for the UK market. I do know somebody who has imported a Defender, one of these Defenders, into the UK before, and they had problems with the MOT station, who said it doesn't have EGR, it doesn't have a catalytic converter. That person emailed me for advice, and I said, well, tell them it never had it. Basically, it did work in the end, but these vehicles never came with that stuff. It's only a fail in terms of the MOT if that equipment was removed, but these vehicles never had it. And that can be proven. So that's just something that I was kind of prepared for, to have a discussion about that with the garage. But I've not had an EGR or catalytic converter on my UK Defender for the last 15 years, and no MOT garage has ever questioned that. So it pays to pick and choose your garages, the ones you know, if you've got a certain type of vehicle that you're keen on, and there's garages that also know those type of vehicles, then it pays to also use those garages if you're importing a vehicle. Anyway, it passed. It took about 2 weeks of solid work to get the vehicle in a roadworthy condition from the UK perspective, but it did at least pass. To register with the DVLA, I sent off a letter, first time I've written a letter in a very long time, and I outlined the documents that I was including. So they are the V55/5 form. There are 2 pages to that. The original certificate of manufacture from the British Motor Museum. That cost about 50 quid, and it turned up within a few days, so it's very good value for money. This is one of the only things that, I think it's the only thing that the DVA will accept for British marks. You have to have an original British Motor Museum heritage certificate. I also sent a copy of the driver's license, copy of the MOT test certificate, a copy of the Nova clearance, which I printed all these out because they were mostly in digital format. Copy of the foreign registration. Technically they want the original. I couldn't send them the original. It was like a little plastic card. I had to deregister the vehicle in Armenia for the seller, so I had to send that document back to allow them to do that. So I basically sent a copy of the front and back of that document to DVLA and explained in the letter that these are the reasons why I can't do it, and they seem to be fine with that. I also sent a copy of the bill of sale. It was a private sale, so I used just a template off the internet, and we sort of scribbled our addresses and signatures on it, and that was fine. You need to send a cheque for registration fee, which for me was 55 quid, and the vehicle tax. You need to get the cheque to the exact penny, because if you don't, then they will reject the application. And if you're imported in Northern Ireland, which I wasn't, then you also need to show proof of insurance. That aspect for calculating what the tax should be, so you need to use the V149 document for the costs, or the current costs of vehicle tax, and you need to use the V355 form to figure out which tax actually applies. Since 2001, the cost of vehicle tax is based off the emissions of the vehicle. Prior to 2001, it was based off engine size. Now, my vehicle being export spec, built in 2007, there is no emissions figure. There's nowhere I can actually find it. It doesn't exist. It was never tested for grams of CO2 per kilometre, so there isn't a figure. So in those situations, you basically fall back to the pre-2001 tax bands, which is known as private light goods brackets PLG. That is a very specific term. Private light goods PLG refers to the tax class, does not refer to model or body of the vehicle, which are separate categories that have their own different terminology. So if you don't know what emissions the engine has on the car, don't call it a diesel car, because that is a very specific taxation class. Don't call it a petrol car, that's also very specific. Don't call it a light goods vehicle, because that is a very specific tax class. You need to call it a private/light goods PLG tax class. And then you need to be careful about which actual figures you select. Because you're paying by cheque, you can't use the direct debit, you have to use the non-direct debit. In my case, I went for 6 months just because I didn't plan on having the vehicle on the road for a bit. So I chose the 6-month non-direct debit private light goods vehicle taxation class for a vehicle with an engine over 1.5 litres, and that did the trick. And then after I sent that in, I basically sawned it straight away when I had the V5C and got 5 months of vehicle tax back. The V55 form has lots of data fields to be entered, specifically mostly for new vehicles sold by dealerships. And a lot of the fields you probably don't have any understanding of, particularly if it's an older vehicle. There is the V355/5 guide to help you filling this in. A lot of the stuff says if applicable, or some of the stuff said it's required, but you don't actually have the data. So on the screen now, I'm showing you what I filled in for my form, and it's actually fairly sparse. There's a surprisingly little amount of information required to get the vehicle registered in the UK. So I'll just pull out some of the key points from this. You can freeze frame the video and check out what I wrote. But basically, you've got to make sure the VIN number's matched, make sure the VIN number matches the Nova certificate, matches all the other documentation you have for bill of sale and foreign registration document. That's very important. I already had Defenders and the V5C, so I basically copied a lot of this information. The other bits that I didn't know I got from PDF user manuals, because I don't have another one of this era, so I got the dimensions and things from the official documentation there. The date of the original registration I put as the date it was sold on the build certificate. As it turned out, so that date was March 2008. As it turned out, they recorded a date of August, sometime in August 2008. I have no idea where they got that from. I don't think they could have misread the month 3 as 8 for August, because they also got the day of the month completely incorrect as well. So they seem to have completely made that up as far as I'm concerned. And I future dated the registration in the UK for the 1st of the next month, just so that it was a clean month when the tax would start. So you can future date that bit. On the back page, it's just your personal details. In the type approval exemption, I just wrote that stated the vehicle was over 10 years old, and that's why it was exempt. I guess you need to also check that you put the number of seats and it's less than 8 if you're importing a car as well. And then you post it. They do say that if you want your documents back, you put in a stamped addressed envelope. I did that with a special delivery envelope, put that in. They completely neglected that. So they sent the V5C, that turned up on one day. About 3 weeks later, I got the V5C. The next day, I've got the letter explaining what the next steps were with the heritage certificate stuffed into it. They'd paid their own postage to send it back, just normal postage in a normal envelope. Don't know what happened to my special delivery letter. The certificate was all crumpled and bent. I wanted that back because it cost me 50 quid and it's quite a cool document, but there we go. They didn't send everything back. They sent back the MOT history and the Nova letter, but they kept all the other copies. I know on some vehicles inspections are required. It wasn't required in my case. I think it tends to be vehicles that are over 40 years old, because that's potentially a way of avoiding vehicle tax and MOT and duty and VAT. So they're probably a bit more hot on those. They want to check the numbers match basically between your document. And what I've heard is that you don't have to take it anywhere. Someone will come to your house and inspect the vehicle. So it didn't happen in my case. I was a bit worried about it, but it does make sense. I think older vehicles, if you're trying to avoid stuff, I paid basically 30% on top. So everyone's happy from that perspective, I guess, or from the government's perspective anyway. So I had the V5C, and you have the letter and it says basically get the number plates. So you send off and got the number plates. In a previous video, I explained putting the number plates and getting that all sorted on this vehicle, and I explained the two mistakes they made. The one I already talked about, which was they got the date wrong, and they also put the model wrong. So the model I wrote on the V5C, they didn't choose that at all. They chose Defender 110 Defender V8. How that happened, why they didn't just use what I wrote verbatim, because what I wrote was actually a model used, it's already in the data set, the DVLA data set. I don't know why they didn't write down what I put there. So I saw that and I was like, oh God. I've basically not tried to fix it, because the model doesn't really mean anything. It's a manufacturer derived field. Manufacturers state what goes into that. They basically put like special editions and things like that into it. It gives a bit of a cachet, I think, to have something different on your V5C. DVLA don't actually care about what it is. They care more about the body type. There isn't a field in the slip that you send off to change the details that allows you to change the model. I would have had to gone probably back and forward to get the model changed and fixed. I didn't think it was completely worth it. Having gone through this rigmarole of getting all this done up to this point, I really didn't feel like I wanted to be in for a discussion with the DVLA, because I've heard that once you start questioning things or trying to get things changed, it can open up a can of worms. Another quirk of the V5C is that it was issued when they issued it, but because I'd future dated the tax, that became the registration date. So for a few days there, I had a document saying that the vehicle was registered and a date saying it wasn't registered yet. So slightly ambiguous, weird situation there, but nevertheless, didn't really matter. So that was the process and my experience. Maybe you found this video useful or interesting. My pride and joy is now in my garden, slowly rusting in the British climate. If you've had an experience that's different than this, or if you know that the process has changed since this video was recorded and published, then please leave a comment down below so other people can learn from the changes. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.